From childhood, African girls are taught that they marry to endure and serve their husbands. But the European girl is taught from childhood that you marry to be happy and to build something with your husband. There's a big gap between the standard of the African woman and the standard of the European woman. Even African men who marry European women bow to this standard. Simply because the European woman does not accept the unacceptable. African women, please use your brains. The infidelity of the African man towards the African woman is intellectual theft, moral abuse and psychological violence. Acceptance of the African man's infidelity by the African woman is alienation. Accidental infidelity can be forgiven, but premeditated infidelity must not be accepted. Repeated occasional infidelity is premeditated. Before entering into marriage, a woman must first be financially independent and able to look after her children on her own. Marriage should not be a necessity, but a way of adding value to what you already have. If you live in Europe, you need to be aware of the laws governing the grounds on which custody of your children can be taken away from you. Custody of your children can be taken away from you when you live in Europe, the USA, and Canada. If you are a woman in a toxic relationship involving physical or emotional violence. A toxic relationship does not only include physical violence. Emotional abuse is more dangerous because it is silent, destroys you slowly, and is fatal. Emotional abuse includes premeditated infidelity, disrespect, insults, threats, a man who yells at you and can't talk to you calmly, a man who doesn't look after the children or the household. Toxic men are all the same. Repeated abusive behavior causes sometimes irreversible damage to the brain. If you don't have the energy or strength to leave a toxic relationship while you're experiencing abusive behavior, you're in the red zone and need help. The red zone is the state you reach when you can no longer tell the difference between a dangerous situation and forgiving mistakes. If you've been in this situation and managed to get out of it, write in the comments how you managed to get out of it. It's best to separate yourself from a toxic man for the sake of your children and yourself. As a preventive measure, leave him at the first signs before marriage. If you don't leave a toxic man at the first sign, it becomes harder to leave afterwards, so the trap closes in on you. You need to know when to leave a toxic relationship or marriage before your brain is so traumatized and anesthetized that you can no longer recognize the danger. Toxic men are manipulators and like to play the victim when in fact they are the ones who make victims. Some toxic men have a covenant with water spirits, spirits of the dead, worship of dead skulls, or spirits from the world of darkness. They have a power of seduction akin to bewitchment, which means that even if you are not initially emotionally dependent, you become emotionally dependent. They sacrifice their spouses because their bonds demand human blood. Many women have lost their lives in this way, and even if you manage to get out of the relationship, it takes years before you find yourself again. Some people never find themselves again and die. Toxic men don't admit their faults, they always blame others and don't apologize. If they do apologize, they repeat the same mistakes over and over again. They often have temper tantrums. They sometimes suffer from paranoia or schizophrenia and dispute the diagnosis of specialists. They hide their condition from the women they meet. Here we're talking about people who live in Europe, because in Africa they never go to specialists. They like to play the victim and lie a lot. Toxic men like particularly social networking sites because they find it hard to get together in real life, partly because of their bad reputation. Never live with a man under the same roof when you don't have your name on the tenancy agreement. Even if you are not contributing to the rent, always make sure you have your name on the tenancy agreement. The majority of men who reach the age of 40 and who are unable to stabilize in a relationship or marriage are men with toxic and abusive behavior. A person who didn't receive love and affection as a child has difficulty giving love to his partner. This extends to not being able to give love to your children. Nothing is lost, everything is transformed. Symptoms may improve with treatment over time, but very often the symptoms worsen with age. Emotionally dependent women easily fall into the trap of toxic men because they lack discernment due to their emotional dependence. If you are emotionally dependent, you do not meet the conditions for entering into a relationship. Treat your emotional dependency before entering into a relationship to avoid suffering psychological damage that may be irreversible. Toxic people are dangerous, rarely change, and have a mental imbalance linked to childhood trauma or a spiritual problem. Don't waste your energy and time trying to change a toxic person. The intellectual level of the women who have tried and ended up in the cemetery varies from the illiterate to women who have a doctorate and even religious women. People with mental imbalances have no consistent treatment in Africa. There are also many mentally ill people in Europe who, as long as they are not required by the courts to undergo treatment because of their mental state, are in the wild without any follow-up. Seek legal advice about your property and the inheritance of your future children. Hire a private detective to investigate your partner before you get married. You will notice that the exes of toxic people always leave them for the same reasons. African men have a polygamous culture and upbringing. Most have grown up in polygamous homes and as adults repeat what they have experienced. African women, particularly those in Europe, can no longer accept abusive behavior. Don't you learn from Western development? Be humble and accept to drop what is bad in African culture and keep what is good. Polygamy is not a good thing even for rich people. Having many children, even in monogamy, is not a good thing. Having many children creates rivalry between them. Just as you can't love several wives equally, you can't love many children equally. It creates favoritism, frustration, and clans. It is the responsibility of the African woman to break this vicious cycle. By becoming financially independent. They must stop accepting the unacceptable, set up a budget for a post-relationship detective, and educate their children.